This is Bulletproof Faith. I'm Jason Gunther.
I'm Amo Kapinski.
All right, Amo. In the last couple of episodes, we started talking through the story of the Great Commission.
Yes, indeed.
And I ran a little ahead by talking about Abraham. And I'd like to back up.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's worth us having a brief discussion on one people that was chosen, but ultimately for all people.
Yeah, we talked about how God divided the people and gave over nations to different spiritual beings, different authorities, which were quite dark.
Yep.
And yet he kept a family for himself. There's a reason that Genesis 12 and the story of Abraham follows right after Genesis 11.
That's right.
The chapters are in dialogue with one another. So let's focus on that. Let's focus now, instead of talking about the dark and wicked pagans, let's focus on God's family and what were they doing and what is God doing through them.
I like it. So in Genesis 12, then, God calls one man, Abraham, to himself, makes a covenant with him, and then gives him this promise. In you, all the families of the earth shall be blessed.
Yeah. So, yeah, that is, there's I just thought about it now, but there's this really old Catholic church in the center of Krakow in Poland that I visited as a kid. And it has its ceiling, it's painted with stars.
Oh, wow.
It's like medieval era, so it's like a blue ceiling with lots of like little yellow dots on it, and it's supposed to represent the family of Abraham, or what the family of Abraham's supposed to do, right? Where his descendants are going to be in number as many as the stars.
So when God chose Abraham, his subsequent generations, which are the Jews or the nation of Israel, they're special. But their specialness isn't because of anything they did. It's really because God chose Abraham, and Abraham was a man of faith. But I would say this way, God chose that family, but it wasn't just for their sake.
I think Israel of Jesus' time was very confused about this. Yes. I think this is the one thing that Jesus was hitting over and over again in his teaching.
Yes.
But yes, God did not abandon the Gentiles. God chose Israel for the sake of the Gentiles. The family of Abraham, in their relationship with God, was supposed to become like a tool in God's hand to take all of these people from these wicked powers and bring them back to himself.
I even think when you look at this story, it's not that God no longer loved mankind or no longer cared about mankind. It's that mankind had become so wicked, God gave them over to their own desires.
That's right.
I mean, that's
what always happens.
Verses that are talked about in the New Testament, God gives them over to their own passions. So God scatters them, not because he hates them, but because they were already so turned against him that God had no choice but to separate that out so that they did not become a destructive force to themselves.
It's a greater love to let somebody do what they want to do than to, by force, by tyranny, stop them.
Yep. And what's interesting too is that Abraham came out of one of those nations.
Yeah.
He was part of that. But he was a God-fearer. The moment God meets him, Abraham has faith. God chose Abraham to be the vessel by which he would carry his inheritance all the way to Christ.
So then Abraham's family grows and becomes a nation in slavery, and they escape slavery. God leads them out of it. They conquer a land for themselves. They become a kingdom, right? And then we get into the kingdom language for Israel. But all throughout that history, there are references to the mission of Israel over and over again. For example, at Sinai, Israel is called the kingdom of priests and a holy nation, right? What does the priest do? A priest doesn't just exist for himself, but for others, right? A priest is a mediator of God's presence to the people. So if Israel is a nation of priests, they're supposed to mediate his presence to the Gentiles, right?
Yeah. Well, and you can see it in Isaiah too. Isaiah talks about Abraham's descendants. It says, I will give you as a light to the nations that my salvation may reach to the end of the earth. There it is explicitly stated. How could Israel's light reach the ends of the earth by salvation of God if it wasn't to reach the Gentiles?
So then Abraham's family, the nation of Israel, the kingdom of Israel, it was always missional.
Yep.
The commission was there, sometimes more explicitly, sometimes less. But again, Jesus is commissioning his disciples to go and do this. It's not new. It's nearly like a restart, right? It's a moment of like, hey, you haven't been able to do this so far.
Right.
But now I've entered the house of the strong man and bound him, and now you can go out and
That's right.
do it.
I was just thinking about this too. After Israel crosses the Jordan River and enters into the Promised Land, which we've talked about in a previous episode, their course of action through the direction of God is to go and conquer the surrounding nations. I've heard a lot of people accuse God, or I would say accuse Christians of believing in a God that is schizophrenic. It's like their accusation is like, well, God tells them to kill people here and then says don't kill, and then you have Jesus who's like, don't use a sword.
Yeah.
Where does God stand on that?
I mean, Joshua is brutal. Judges are brutal.
And I'm not going to mince words here. Yeah. Israel did really brutal things. But the command of God was also clear in some of those cases where he says, leave nobody alive.
Yeah.
It's pretty terrible. But I wonder if you can reframe this. It wasn't that God was angry or that Israel was supposed to brutally murder people. It's that those nations were under that authority of darkness. And part of, if you will, a precursor to the Great Commission is that in preparing a land so that God could bring light back in, he had to remove the darkness completely and create like this encasement of light and godliness, because God knew the weaknesses of Israel, and we'll get into this in the next episode. But Israel was supposed to be a holy nation so that they would not succumb to the dark powers around them. And the only way that's going to happen is if they're completely removed from their midst.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, Israel does not actually do that, right? They do not wipe out Canaan. They live alongside the Canaanites and intermarry them and begin to worship the same awful pagan deities that the Canaanites worshipped.
So then moving on in that story, they chose not to obey God completely. And what happens next is that they become unclear. The purity of God's people becomes polluted. And so what God was commanding them to do was judge and remove and like push ahead all of his righteousness onto the earth in that region. But Israel chose otherwise.
Yeah, they become as corrupt as the nations they're supposed to rescue, right? They become the blind leading the blind. They can't do it. And God equips them too, right? Like they have the Torah, they have the temple. Something is still amiss.
Well, God gave them the Torah so that they would know who he is. The Torah is perfect. The law is perfect.
Yeah.
It doesn't attempt to bring salvation of an eternal kind, but its attempt was to demonstrate the nature and character of God to the people of God so that they could know him and obey him. But even with that, because of mankind's frailty and because of our inability to govern ourselves, the Israelites ultimately become just as corrupt as the nations that they were supposed to destroy.
Yeah. I'm thinking when it comes to the Torah, I'm thinking of Romans like 3-7. Paul has a long discourse about it. But it's really like the Torah is given to Israel as a tool, a diagnostic tool. Look, these are my laws. This is what it looks like when people live according to my will. So see how you don't do that. See where your sin is, so that you may be able to come and be with me and live with me and be healed.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of like, and we've probably used this analogy before, but, imagine a man with a tumor. He goes to see a doctor and he scans him and he gives him the scan of the tumor. Like, here's what needs fixing. Here's the scan of the tumor. Here's what's wrong. And the person, instead of seeking to be healed and speaking to the doctor, God, they just start speaking to the tumor in the scan, right? And become like, corrupted by their own sin that they can now see. Yeah. It's like Paul says, I did not know what covetousness was until the law came and said, do not covet.
It's true.
The same evil then that rules over the nations is making a harm in Israel too.
Yep. And this is why God is so jealous for his own people, because that is his only portion in the earth at this moment, where God needs Israel to demonstrate godliness to the world, really, again, as a show of God's sovereignty and also his love and holiness, because later on down the road, that's the avenue through which Jesus is going to come.
Yeah.
So Israel worships the gods of the nations. They were called to first clear the land, establish a kingdom, and then from there, what you see is they're supposed to be the light, so that all other nations will be blessed, right? That's what God promised to Abraham. That's coming later. But in the meantime, you have Israel worshiping the gods of the nations around them. Their kings imitate pagan kings.
Yep.
You got story after story. And in the process, God's having to send them into captivity.
Yep.
Sending them off, basically, if you will, as a discipline, so that they will repent of the gods they're serving. Say, look at how bad this is. Are you sure you want that? Or you can come back to me.
Sometimes when we start going down this road, it starts to sound like God has this plan A, Israel, but it's just not working out over and over again. So he needs to come up with plan B, which is Jesus. But that is not how this is working.
That's not.
I think Israel here, yes, they have a job to do that God knows they cannot do, but that reveals the depth of the problem, right? They can have the Torah, they can have the temple, they can have all these laws and institutions that are perfect and God-given all around them, but it will not work because the problem, the corruption is inside each person.
That's right.
Do you know Alexander Solzhenitsyn?
Yes.
He has this famous line in the Gulag Archipelago. He says, the line between good and evil runs through the heart of every human person. Right? The problem is not in here. It's not bad law. It's not bad institutions. It's not wicked kings. The problem is in here. Something here needs to be fixed. And the prophets start to see that too, right? And start making promises.
And here's the beauty and the tension. If the plan all along was to send Christ through that lineage, while on the one hand they were to reflect the glory of God, their failure actually called and highlighted the need for something even greater than what they had. And so by the time Jesus shows up, the rescuers themselves, Israel, need to be rescued. And that's where Jesus appears, is at their darkest moment. We're talking Second Temple Jewish period.
Yeah.
You know, and by Second Temple, for those who aren't familiar, the temple was destroyed by Babylon and Israel is sent into captivity. And they never really are put back together.
Yeah.
They rebuild the temple. Jews are very confused. And you have the rise of the Pharisees and the Sadducees and all of these political and religious sects that have absolutely distorted the law of God, which is perfect and right, but it's become so corrupt that this is the moment that God chooses to send Jesus in. It had to have been by design.
With the exile, God judges Israel for this wickedness that has grown inside of them. And though they do come back, they don't really. They come back to the land. They rebuild the temple, but like very soon after they're conquered again by Alexandrian Greeks, and then Rome takes over that, and they do not have like their own kingdom in the same way. They always have to make compromises with the nations. And yet in that time, through the prophets, God is promising the change that will come in Jesus, right? A new spirit, a new heart, a new covenant, cleansing from sin, return of God's presence, right? There's a way in which that first temple is spectacularly filled with God's presence, and we never hear about that happening in the second temple.
Why do you think that is?
I think the second temple, though commissioned by God, is just a sign for Jesus to come. And God does not dwell in the second temple in the same special way in which he dwells in the first temple, in which he dwells in Jesus, who's the third temple, or in the way that he now dwells in us who've been filled with his spirit.
It's an interesting statement. So God commissions the building of the second temple. You see that in the book of Ezra, Nehemiah. but God never brings his presence the way he did after the completion of the first temple. But Jesus shows up, and Jesus makes this statement that says, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. Very clearly equating himself to the temple that was built. The Pharisees thought Jesus was talking about the physical temple. But
I mean, many historians will point to Jesus' conflict with the temple authorities as the legal justification for his crucifixion.
Right.
It's the threat to
the threat to the temple.
Yeah.
Because he was. With Jesus on the earth, there was no need for a temple anymore. He was the temple, and it would be resurrected, and then that would be put in each of us. Wow. So, to conclude this segment, then, God's people, while they went amiss, and we can see how it was in a design of God, because what really needed to happen was to bring something greater than the law. God's portion and inheritance was about to be exploded, if you will, onto the rest of the world. God's people had to be remade before they could fulfill the true Great Commission.
There's something wrong with Israel. Israel needed help. God needed to come in himself and intervene. And I think since we're talking about the temple, maybe this is just a foretaste of a future episode. But I'm thinking now of the Great Commission through temple theology. The temple is the dwelling place of God. It's the mechanism for the forgiveness of sins. And Jesus' death and resurrection cleanses us in that legal way where God's presence can come and dwell in us. So we become temples on legs and walk out into the world.
So with that said, I think we need to look next at the one who actually came to make Israel what it should have been, and the one who actually authorizes the Great Commission altogether.
What's his name?
You'll find out in the next episode. Thanks.
All right.
Talk soon.
Awesome.